Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski and today I'm talking to Katie Hall, who is a current PhD student. I wanted to talk to Katie for lots of different reasons, for her own journey into the process, which is a fascinating one, her innovative research work that she's carrying out, but also because she's had experience of being a part-time student and the challenges of that and how she has negotiated that. So in this episode, we talk about the PhD as a self-development process and how to balance that with other commitments around it and find space for deep work. We are also joined at one point by my kitten, so I do apologise for the rustles and nudges which he has added to this episode, and I do hope that you enjoy it. Good morning, Katie.
Good morning, Emma.
Thank you so much for coming on to talk. I am genuinely so excited to talk to you about this.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's lovely. Once again, how lovely is this to just be able to talk to people about things that are exciting? Because we came across each other on the TechNate programme. It's called Breathing Space, and it's about kind of just looking at well-being in the PhD process. And you very kindly said that you would come on and talk about transitioning from being a part-time student to being a full-time student, because I know that it's a challenge for a lot of people to be part-time, and then they're thinking, well, should I go full-time? So I thought that'd be really useful for people to hear. But also secretly, actually not so secretly, I really wanted to talk to you more also about your methodology for your PhD and the subject, because it is fascinating. So thank you very much for agreeing to do all of that. And we always start with just asking people about their journey. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey into your PhD?
I can. It's quite extended because I'm quite old. Well, sometimes I feel quite old. So I turned 40 this year and I'm feeling those numbers.
That is not old. Can I just say that, everybody? Let's just all remember that 40 is very young. I think this is quite important.
Thank you. But yeah, it means there's a lot of history leading up to getting to the point of PhD. So hopefully that will be of interest, and definitely also informs some of the decisions around part-time and full-time PhD work as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I did my sort of standard undergraduate degree between 18 and 21, and I did English at Warwick, and I loved it, and I loved university, and I did loads of extracurricular stuff. But I ended up going straight into the workplace because the thought of postgraduate education just didn't ever cross my mind. There were like people around me doing masters, but it wasn't something that was immediately within my frame of reference outside of university. And I just thought, oh, that's not for me. That's for those really clever students, and I'm not one of those. But I did go into work that I really enjoyed, and I started working in students' unions, which I loved, and are great places to work, especially at that early career stage. But I think that for me was partly around still feeling that connection to higher education.
Right.
And then I ended up working in sort of that sphere in the voluntary sector for around 16 years. And I did mostly communications roles and management roles, which is very typical of an English literature graduate. Met lots of English literature graduates along my way. But at the same time, I always did my creative writing. I did some of that at undergraduate. So Warwick was just emerging in its creative writing programme at the time. So I just missed the point at which it became very established, but I was there at the early days and got to take a few modules, and I loved it. And I knew writing was always going to be important to me, but it always felt like a hobby. So I kind of continued it as a hobby outside of working, and did writing workshops and wrote little bits and pieces here and there. And then about, I guess, 6 or 7 years ago, I started to feel that it was really important to me and a really big part of my identity, and something that I didn't want to compromise against having to work full time.
Yes.
So I reduced my hours at work, and my wife at the time and I set up an online platform, which is sort of like a magazine for lesbian, bi and queer women, which I was the editor-in-chief of. And that was about writing and commissioning lots of content relevant to lesbian lifestyle. So lots of things like reviews of events, reviews of books and films and TV, and got to go to some amazing events and write about them and interview some incredible women within the community and important to the community. And I really thrived doing that, but it was still very much a hobby.
Yes.
And very much an additional thing outside of work. And that was, a lot to juggle, kind of almost like having 2 full-time jobs in a way. But it pointed to me that there were opportunities to make writing as a career, and that began to get more and more important to me. And at the same time, MAs, Masters in Writing and Creative Writing, were starting to become popular. So back when I was an undergraduate, there weren't creative writing MAs really then. There were like maybe 1 or 2, but they weren't a thing. And I think probably about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a bit longer, they started to become a thing. And I thought, I'd love to take a career break and do an MA in creative writing, but financially I just wasn't in that position to do that. But my writing continued, and I started to get some more success and included in some anthologies, and I wrote and produced a web series, which was a real passion project. So it was the UK's first lesbian sort of content web series, and it went down quite well, and we made it, I fundraised for it, developed the budget, made it with a team of contributors, collaborators, and it was a fantastic experience. And I thought, that was 5 years ago, I just thought, I need to do this. I need to be writing and producing and creating. And then I got really ill. I got cancer right at that same time that we were releasing the web series. I was diagnosed, and that at the same time turned everything around as well. And I thought, right, I need to prioritize me now, because this is telling me life is too short and you can't spend too much time trying to make an unhappy or a tense situation, or where you're kind of compromising too much on working in a career that isn't giving you the satisfaction anymore, against your hobby. And those two things were kind of becoming more and more of a tension against each other. And I thought, I need to make a change now as part of my recovery, really, as part of that. Having sort of the physical treatment, I need to also have a mental recovery from this experience. And at the same time, I also ended up leaving my wife, and there were lots of reasons for that, but one of the reasons was that she wasn't on board with me making that decision to prioritize a happy career for myself. And I thought, no, I need to do this. And then shortly after that, I had the chance to take a voluntary redundancy in my career. But just to say, a caveat is that my workplace were incredibly supportive of all of my extracurricular activities, and were really flexible about time, letting me use annual leave creatively and letting me kind of reduce and scale my hours up and down. So I couldn't have asked for more from them, really. And then there was a massive restructure, and they wanted me to stay, but I thought, I've got a chance here to break away with a bit of a cushion, because I'd been there 6 years. And they were very kindly, without any resistance, let me take voluntary redundancy. And that was the catalyst, I think, the thing that I needed to go, right, this is my chance to get out of work and have some time off, reflect, and do something else, and do the MA and be financially able to do the Masters. And I thought, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that this is, I'm sure this will resonate with lots of people, is this kind of hollering of your heart that is with you for a long time. PhDs are just so often about passion. I think if you ask someone what their PhD is, it tells you a lot about themselves. And yet often it is something that it's there, you know, it's in your heart, but you kind of go, well, it's not really for me, not really sensible, not really, all of those kind of things. And that sense of actually that life situation for you, that you gave yourself permission and said, yeah, actually, do you know what? I am going to do this. I am going to go forward. I'm going to find a way forward, which is amazing. What a story.
I agree. And I think that's a really important part. And partly I think like I had to wait also till it was the right time for other reasons, and not just financial, not just the marriage, not just lots of other things. I think I had to be ready for it, and I wasn't ready until then either. So all of those things came together at the right time for me, and I was 37 at that point. I was going back to uni as a mature student, and I made the very kind decision to myself to do the master's part-time,
right?
Because for writing MA you often have to produce 40,000 words in a year, and I hadn't ever done that, and that felt like a lot. And I thought, no, I want to slow this down and enjoy it. So doing the master's part-time was about thinking, right, I can savor this. Gorgeous. I can make the most of all the other opportunities that there are being back at university. So it's not just the course, it's you can audit modules and sit in on other classes, you can go to research seminars and other events. I ended up doing my MA back at Warwick, and so I commuted from London, but once or twice a week. But I actually enjoyed the commute because that driving time gave me headspace to think about my writing and studying. And then when I was on campus, nothing was ever pressured. It was really, really able to savor it. But also, like, I deliberately chose to go back to Warwick, I did visit a few campuses, but I thought I want to go somewhere that feels like home. Right. And there was something in that feeling myself being in that space. And also I think being away from my normal environment was quite helpful as well, to reconnect to some of those other parts of me that I'd let go by the wayside. So kind of my love of working in the library and being around other people doing cool things. And also Warwick has a massive art centre, so it is a thriving hub of kind of culture as well, which can be limited outside of London sometimes, I think, or not known about outside of London. So there were lots of reasons.
And I think, again, what you're saying there is so important in terms of the PhD as a personal development journey, which I think we don't talk about very much. And that actually, that sense of, I love your word savouring, that sense of being in it and just immersing yourself in that process, in your own thinking, taking on material and taking on experiences. And just that, what a fantastic way to go into this.
Yeah, I'm really fortunate I was able to do that. I mean, there were things at the back of my mind. So one of those things was, this could be the starting point of a career change. And very quickly into it, I thought, I don't want to go back to a 9-to-5 career. And I really enjoy this, and is academia a possible route for me and a career for me? And there is a thing called a creative writing PhD now. Wow, is that something I can do? So that very quickly started to come into play, and it had sort of been part of my intention. But I think straight away I thought, no, I feel at home in this space, and I need to experience and grow this side of me that I've sort of left dormant for a long time.
So tell us then about this this creative writing PhD, which I am just fascinated by. Tell us a little bit about your project and how you're going I do have to apologise because my kitten has decided that he wants to join in with this interview, and so if you can hear banging, that's what it is.
Oh, okay, right. Just keeping a kitten entertained as well.
He's decided he wants to tap the microphone. I think he wants to be part of it all. But,
all right, we'll factor that in.
But yes, please tell us more about this creative writing process and the kind of methodology that you're evolving for your work.
Yeah, I mean, so in some ways it seems like a bit of a dream doing a PhD in creative writing, because it's and this particular project as well, because it's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and to merge that into an actual PhD research practice based but research project has been just wonderful. So for a long time, I've always thought my friendships with other women have been such important parts of my life, and I have wanted to honour them in some way. And I knew I wanted to write about them, but I never knew how I would do that. And then a few years ago, I went to a book launch with Gillian Anderson and Jennifer Nadal, and
amazing names, just to say.
Fantastic women. Got to meet them afterwards, which was lovely. And got to hear what they were saying about empowering women. And I just thought, yes, that's the sort of frame I want to hang my stories off, really. It's about celebrating what friendships give us. But more than that, I think I was thinking about some of my friendships might be considered unconventional. They've gone on very different journeys. There's lots of intimate details that are part of those friendships. And I wanted to express, I think, my championing of friendships that are outside of a heteronormative norm, and that valuing those moments of unconventionality where friendships are outside of a platonic boundary perhaps and become different things that might be romantic or sexual, and what that means, and have time to reflect on some of that and what that's given me and how that's made me a better person. And in doing so, be a manifesto for these kinds of friendships, really, and say we need more of them in the world, because they make me feel stronger, and these are the friendships that make me feel I can dismantle the patriarchy and overcome some of those massive barriers that exist in the world for women and females and non-binary people.
Got this amazing content which you are working with, and then not only that, you are working with it in an innovative way. So the kind of the methodology that you're creating is innovative too.
Yeah, so obviously memoir and autobiography and confessional writing is a well-established form, and it's been adopted by women as quite a feminist methodology over the decades. And I really wanted to present the information in a different way, and I didn't know what that looked like for quite a long time. And then after really thinking about it right up until the point I started the PhD, I started to think about a patchwork quilt initially, and the idea that a patchwork quilt is made of very small individual squares that have their own story, but then all contribute to a bigger picture that if you step away from, you can see. And I thought that's the narrative structure. It's individual, standalone stories that come together and can be looked at from multiple perspectives and different ways. And also, there is an increasing interest in microfiction and flash fiction and short contained stories. So it's sort of tapping into a trend that exists in the marketplace at the moment. And I think attention spans of readers can be mixed. So being able to pick up a book and just read 1 or 2 pages and get something whole from it is quite appealing to readers as well sometimes, as well as that those sections contributing to a bigger whole. So I thought, okay, that's what I want to do. I want to break down these stories into small events, because otherwise, how do you go, right, I'm writing about these, and those 7 to 10 friendships, and I don't really want to go, right, we met on this day and then we did this and then we did that. and be quite boring. Sort of the case study of the friendship. I wanted to not be boring as well. And I thought, what's important are key moments. So if I can distill some of that key moments and then create, I don't know, 10 or so micro chapters about a whole friendship that's broken up into individual parts, that's one thing. And then in terms of my research, I've got really interested in drawing from other disciplines and a kind of interdisciplinary approach. So using different forms as well. So I already wanted to write some of it as poetry, some of it as maybe letters, some of it as monologues. So I was already thinking about form, but on top of that, trying to draw from other styles and forms from other disciplines. So one of the stories is written as code. For example, one of the sections will be probably a glossary. Manifesto actual form is going to be one of the modes, and I'm sure there's going to be many more that I come across in my research as well, and just trying to tell stories in different ways.
I love that. So I love that this is kind of this experimental material, well, not experimental material, but you're breaking new grounds in the material, but you're also working kind of formally, and the methodology is experimental too. Fantastic. And so not only are you doing all of that, you also are doing that part-time. And so we kind of come into this key bit now. How do you do that? What are what in your experience, those kind of challenges of being a part-time student, and perhaps what were some of the strategies that you found to work with that, and perhaps how is it different now you're full-time? Does it throw things into perspective for you?
It is different. So I had to do it part-time because financially I didn't have another choice, and that was a tough decision actually to start with, because the overall time pressure means that the PhD then takes 6 or so years. And I was 39 when I started the PhD, and I thought, I'm not going to finish till I'm 45, and that felt quite monumental. But it was the only option, and I just had to bite the bullet and go with it. And then so I also had a part-time job, or 2 part-time jobs. So I was working 3-ish days a week on paid work, other projects, and then only had 2 days a week last year really on the PhD, up until COVID and lockdown, and then it all kind of changed. So it's really difficult. The biggest challenge for me early on was the mental headspace of moving from a day of paid work to a day of PhD.
Right.
And the paid work had quite specific demands on my time, which was hard. So I couldn't choose the days I worked. For example, I needed to be in the office on specific days that my employer asked for, which meant I then had specific days for the PhD, and rarely had 2 days in a row even. So that switching in and out just takes time.
Tough. Yes.
And we know that I still have that now, being full-time, and switching between different sections of my PhD or types of work for it, I find hard. So, and doing that between completely different roles was tough, but the work that I had was very different, and I think that was a critical thing. So doing a job that's the opposite of the PhD, and it was using a different part of my brain. It was very much a left brain job, sort of doing numbers and data and quantitative things, and I found that quite helpful because it meant my qualitative right brain, logical, creative side, was getting a rest.
Yes.
And could kind of be working in the background while the other bit of my brain was using. So definitely having a contrasting job was a big part of, I think, the success, because when I'd worked before when I worked full time doing a comms role, and particularly the more senior I got, that was very draining and left little creative energy in non-work time to do writing. And I found I was doing less and less because more of that creative right brain side was being used at work and drained and not leaving anything. So I didn't want to repeat that. But though, it's difficult because there's things that you're not going to be able to go to. So I had to work on a Wednesday. That meant I would automatically miss any interesting workshops, seminars, events that happened on a Wednesday or a Friday. So you're immediately cutting sort of things that you won't be able to take part in. And that's quite a big compromise.
Yes.
And then also you've got to align more things for time off. So you're not just going to one employer and saying, I want next week off. You've got to go, right, is that a good week to take a week off uni and work? Am I making the most of my downtime in that way? Certainly try not to get into habits of using all annual leave from work to do stuff for uni, because then you'll never have a rest or a holiday. Sort of those big considerations. And then when lockdown happened, that was a huge change, because all of a sudden I'd gone from either working in an office or normally in the library on campus to working everything at home. So the space for my paid work also was the space for my PhD, and that was a big culture shock.
Because you'd had that useful, as you said, and actually for some people that actually can be a useful strategy to have another project going on in order to kind of alternate the energy.
Yeah.
But actually, as you say, being all in the same place, the same kind of feel, that then brings challenges.
Yeah, it does. It's really difficult. Makes it much harder to distinguish, I'm doing this in this block of time and that in that block of time. And I switched my working pattern to work a little bit every day rather than on fixed days, because that made more sense and actually gave more time for the PhD. But it created the problem of I'm going from this to that on the same space, on the same laptop, in sort of, in the same mind frame. How do I make a transition?
And how did you find any ways to?
One of the things I was really lucky was work gave us all laptops eventually, and so having a separate computer was quite a helpful thing. So I would turn the work one on, do a couple of hours work, close it down, put it away, and then start elsewhere. So that those kind of key transitional activities, whatever they are really important. I planned my daily exercise. Not as good about that now, but at the time I planned my daily exercise to be the break in between as well. So to make sure I was getting outside and doing something and switching off from one thing to the other.
I think those transitions are so important. Are they transitioning from one thing to another?
They're hugely important. So whatever I think you can do, whether it's just going downstairs and having a tea break, having lunch, going outside for a short walk, whatever it might be, a very clear transition where your body and your mind know I'm going from one thing to another, are crucial. Learning to be boundaried is the other thing, and saying no. So I think particularly when you're part-time, it can be really tempting to go, oh, I could work a few more hours and get a bit more money, but then there's a price, which is that you have less time for your PhD. So jiggling kind of what's right for you, and knowing it doesn't have to be the same every week, and you don't force yourself to commit to a particular position on that either. I think allow yourself and give yourself permission to be flexible on what works, and think about your own strategies. Does it work best for you to have a few days in a row on the PhD? In which case, can you schedule your work to be sort of work around that? So what's your priority? What are you putting first? I got into some.
Sorry.
Go on.
I was just going to say that's the gorgeous gift of doing the PhD is kind of you're your own boss.
Yes.
That's also the problem of being the PhD, because you're your own boss, and you need to find your own way through. So that sense of what works for you, and also what, like you say, what works for you in that moment, and then what works for you, it might be different then in a different phase.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I constantly feel guilty even though I'm full-time. I think possibly even more now that I'm full-time.
That's
I feel
interesting.
guilty when I'm not doing PhD. Yeah, I think that's quite common. I'm not doing enough. I should be doing more. That horrible word should. I've not progressed as far as I could, and now I'm full-time. I feel even more accountable.
Right.
I think for me, I suppose one of the risks or one of the unknowns of being part-time was it was much less clear how much I should be doing, could be doing, how far I should progress, because you've got so much longer to complete the task. And I also found like I couldn't do more than one thing at a time. So my PhD is kind of mostly made up of three main areas of work. So the reading, the creative writing, and then the critical writing. And doing it part-time, it was one thing a week if I was lucky, if I didn't have a workshop to go to or other training to go to that week. So you feel like you can only make progress in one area at a time, which can feel quite frustrating as well.
Although you're making progress.
Yes,
So
everything you do is progress, and it's all part of it.
Yeah.
I think the best bit of advice that I've heard in one of the many workshops I've attended is that your PhD isn't your thesis. Your PhD is developing you as a researcher.
Yes.
It's everything is valuable. And it's not just the thesis. Although that's one of the end products, it's not the only end product. And being as rounded and getting as much on the experience as possible is more important than the perfect thesis.
Oh, I love that. Yes, that sense of this, as we said, as a personal development journey, that you will end up in a much different place than when you start, and you'll also have a thesis.
Exactly that. Yeah.
So that's one bit of golden advice. So we're going to get more than our money's worth for you then, because I always end with asking people for a top tip. So what will be your top tip for people, especially if they are working part-time on their PhD at the moment?
There's two things. So try not to constantly compare against what everyone else is doing, everyone else's practice and progress. And talking about that personal development, part of the journey is developing your own discipline, and what's right for you. And you won't know what that is on day one. And that's going to come through experimentation and trial and error, and might not be the same today as it is tomorrow as well. But figuring out what's right for you without sort of worrying about what everyone else is doing, I think, is key.
Yes.
And you'll get lots of advice. Really, you'll get lots of advice thrown at you, and you'll attend lots of workshops and read lots of things that have lots of tips and things, but only use what's relevant.
Yes.
Discard everything that doesn't sound right, that isn't helpful, that doesn't fit for you, and just discard it. Only take from all of that advice what works for you. And I've reread actually a really good book called Deep Work by a man called Cal Newport, and I think what I particularly take away from that is he doesn't advocate one way of doing it. He promotes a few different frameworks, and some of those are really pertinent to part-time workers or people that are juggling multiple responsibilities. And how can you go deep into work when you're not just doing the one and only thing? So it's quite realistic in terms of working out ways to develop different strategies, and that goes from sort of a macro level of the year to a micro level of a week. So there's some good things.
It's really practical as well, doesn't it? Get some really practical advice in there too.
Exactly.
Excellent. Oh, thank you so much. There's so much in this conversation in terms of your own story, the work that you're doing, and that your reflections on that part-time, full-time dynamic. Thank you so much, Katie.
My pleasure.
And I wish you all the best with
Thank you
your
very
research. And thank you all for listening.